never going to be paid back. You had a much better shot at profiting if you just forgave it, turned back the clock to zero and started over, which is what he's done. We would benefit from doing similar things in many parts of the world. In fact, we would benefit enormously if we simply admitted that we can't go on with the enormous sovereign debt that hangs over our heads. But nobody will do that. The point is, I think it had less to do with the Russians or the Chinese and simply to do with the anger and frustration that built up for a long time towards colonialism. And the Africans said enough. We should say, fine, good luck. And then we ought to question what we're doing in all of these places with military power. If you want to go into these places, by all means, look for business. Compete on the business level, but get out of this militarized foreign policy. It's a loser.
Fair points. I couldn't agree more. Going back to Ukraine, I'd love to catch your thoughts on the recent developments with an American Chilean journalist, YouTuber, Gonzalo Lira. I don't know if you've had conversations with him in the past. Are you familiar with his case?
Yes, I watched a couple of programs that he created and then broadcasted from Kharkov, which is where I think he and his family were living. Mm-hmm. And I thought he was very important because he was telling the truth. And he was telling people from the very beginning, the Russians really aren't losing. The Ukrainians are losing. The Russians are deliberate, they're methodical, and they're dealing with a problem. And we really ought to find a solution to this, but stop running around and pretending that the Russians are losing. And that was pretty much what I was getting from my contacts on the ground. And I watched yesterday as a spokesman for the State Department was asked specifically about Gonzaga Lira, and he pretended to act as though, first of all, who are you talking about? And secondly, well, I don't know if any of that's true. I think what we're seeing is that the same disregard for the safety of an American citizen in Ukrainian hands is what we see with regard to the victims of criminality in New York, Washington, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Miami, wherever, especially if they're white, especially if they're Northeast Asians. We don't care about you. And I think that's what the administration is saying. It's a terrible thing to say, and I'm sure not everybody in the administration agrees with that. But whether they agree with it or not, that's the Biden, Blinken, Merrick Garland message to the world and to us.
I guess I just don't understand I guess maybe that's the whole point. It's not to be understood, but the premise of sending $200 billion, who knows how much at this point we've sent to Ukraine, and now they're disappearing people like Gonzalo Lira. He tried to flee over to the Hungarian side of the Ukrainian border, and we don't know where he is. We've seen some reports claiming that he was wrapped up again by ASBU. Some reports claim he's on the run. I just failed to comprehend how this is even a possibility for our government, but this is the new America, right?
Well, let's be honest. If President Biden turned to his cabinet and he said, I want this man released immediately, I'm sure that our friend Gonzaga Lira would be on a plane tomorrow morning. There's no doubt about it. Ukraine is a creature of U.S. foreign policy. We pay for its government. We pay for virtually everything. And we've certainly turned in Zelensky and many of his inner circle into multimillionaires with estates and residences all over the world. So if we said, listen here, we've had enough of this nonsense, we want this man released, he'd be out. But you'll remember this basketball player, I think her name was Grange or something like that.
Yeah, Brittany Griner.
Yeah, Griner, I'm sorry. And she was released. And at the same time, we had a man in Russian custody who was convicted of espionage. He was, I guess, in the State Department, but had been engaged in espionage. He was a former Marine, I think, who had seen action in the Marine Corps. And there was an interesting commercial. Well, it was really a commercial. It was a show, one of these talk shows in Russia. And the discussion was the American government leaves no stone unturned to bring home this woman who has publicly denounced the United States, poured nothing but buckets of filth and abuse all over the American people, but they'll do anything to retrieve her and bring her back to the United States, and fine, we're happy to be rid of her. But look, here's an American patriot that we're holding in prison. And that's what they called him. He's an American patriot. He broke our laws, but he is an American patriot. And what's wrong with him? And then, they would start, well, he's white. He's a man. He was in the military. If Americans haven't figured out what's going on in this country, well, maybe they should watch Russian TV because they'll find out. And they were telling the truth. It doesn't make any sense. It is the antithesis of everything that we in this country, I think, have been trying to build for decades. We've tried to build a society with equality for everyone before the law. Not equality of outcome, not special privileges for anybody, simply equality before the law. And this rule of law has separated us from everybody in the world. That's why we were such a success story in business and economics. But that doesn't seem to be on the agenda these days for the Biden administration.
Definitely not. Definitely not. After I watched that new interview with Tucker Carlson and the Hunter Biden business associate, I mean, definitely not there. It's clear. It's just rank corruption left and right everywhere in this administration. But that, again, not really a surprise. One of my friends, Daniel Burke, he had a good question for you that I can't wrap my head around. Maybe you can. Question is, how can the crumbling U.S. economy be rescued in the context of the rise of BRICS and BRICS nations as they continue to expand and grow? Can we eliminate Wall Street and City of London control over our economy in light of this?
Your friend has hit the principal nails right on the head. The first thing is, I don't consider myself an expert, but I do listen to others who are. One of those is Nassim Taleb, who tried to point out a few weeks ago to a rather unreceptive audience on MSNBC that we were headed into something at least as bad as what happened in 2008 and probably a lot worse. And they said, well, why? He said, well, it's because we tried to use monetary policy to fix a structural problem. In other words, we tried to use monetary policy to conceal the debt problem. Instead of dealing with the serious debt issue and how over-leveraged we are as a country, we decided, forget it. We didn't address any of the issues you and I have talked about in terms of repatriating industry, manufacturing, re-energizing, reinvigorating the energy sector. These are obvious things. The agrarian sector, these are America's great advantages in the economic business, and we've done the opposite. We've tried to beat them into submission or drive them into the ground. And he said, under the circumstances, I don't see anything changing. And they said, well, how does it change? He said, well, it won't change without any pain. We're going to have real pain. And most of the pain is going to be up in Wall Street. Go back and remember what Sheila Bair had to say when we went through all of this in 2008. She was talking specifically about Fannie Mae and Fannie Mac and these enormous bailouts that were arranged between the Bush and Obama crowd for all of their friends on Wall Street and so forth. And she said, well, you want to bail people out? How about 10 cents on the dollar? What's this 100% bailout for people that have done a poor job of managing everything? And if it's not only a poor job of management, maybe it's a certain amount of deceit that borders on criminality. She was right. Sheila Bair was 100% on target. Well, here we sit. We're about to go through something at least that bad, according to Nassim Taleb. Now, that has to be juxtaposed against another problem, and that is what you talked about with the BRICS and Russia, China, India, the major powers outside of Europe and North America. This is the problem of going to a gold-backed currency. And I would tell everyone, look up Alasdair Macleod. He is a brilliant economist who's talking about this movement, steady movement, led by Moscow, towards gold-backed currency. Well, that's anathema to us. And of course, the Federal Reserve goes into, hyperdrive when you mention gold-backed anything. Remember Bernanke, who testified and said, when he was asked, why do banks still hold gold if it's worthless? And he said, well, it's a tradition. Come on. Bernanke and Yellen and the rest of these people, we weren't all born yesterday. Maybe last night, but not yesterday. So we do understand gold has real value. And we're in a hell of a fix right now, because once this takes off, and I think it will, it'll take time, but it's going to de-dollarize the planet. And our dollar is already weakened. And I don't see how we come through this without a serious crisis here at home. But again, to go back to Nassim Taleb, he's right. You know, Schumpeter used to talk about the unavoidable necessity of creative destruction in the marketplace. In other words, some corporations, firms, businesses have to fail. Others prosper. It's the nature of the marketplace. That's going to happen here. We're going to have some creative destruction in the economy. I think it will also be matched in the political sector.
Mm-hmm. I 100% agree. It's difficult times, no doubt. We've got ourselves into a pickle. Another country that has themselves in a pickle, to be frank, right now, is Poland. The Polish are very worried about this Wagner threat that is supposedly near their border, on their border. I can't tell if this is all, I mean, I know there's Polish elections that are coming up soon. I can't tell if this is all, you know, fear-mongering in an effort to try and actually get the current apparatus reelected in Poland, or if this Wagner threat, this Wagner group threat in Belarus is actually something that could materialize into a real threat for Polish sovereignty and spark some bigger, issue for the world as a whole, considering Poland is a NATO member. What do you think is really happening here ever since the Prigozhin mutiny and Wagner was exiled to Belarus?
Well, I'm going to try and speak over the laughter in the Kremlin. It's becoming deafening over here. The Poles are wonderful people. I like them. I grew up with a number of them. They are sort of hopeless romantics. And they were a leading power in the world from about 1459 until 1794. And they then vanished. They vanished for reasons that had a lot more to do with them and their own internal problems, much as our own, than with anything else. And they've been trying to get back to 1794 or earlier ever since. I don't think that's going to happen right now, nor do I think it's necessary for Poland. But that's why you've heard the Poles say things that are vile and hateful about Russia, and also make ridiculous assertions about the military power that Poland disposes over and how, together with Lithuania and others, they could take on Moscow. The Polish population, my impression is, and I saw a poll that said 52% of Poles agree that Ukraine should be supported, but the same 52% say we don't want to be in the war. So if that's true, that's an important turning point. I think the government needs to pay attention to that. They have elections in the fall. And there is some evidence from Poland that perhaps the government thinks that if they can march into Western Poland and stake out some terrain as Ukraine collapses, that that'll somehow or another keep them in power. There's another school of thought that says, well, if they go over there, they're going to be annihilated by the Russians. And that'll be the end of the Polish government. They'll be thrown out of office. Or perhaps the Poles hope that if they go over there and they're slammed by the Russians, that we'll rush in to rescue them. I mean, I don't know which of those is the most likely course of action. I hope the most likely course of action is forget it. We're not going. I hope somebody in Washington is telling them, don't even think about it. Mm-hmm. It's not a good idea. We want an end to the war. But as you point out, no one seems to be interested in ending this war. We keep deluding ourselves. Oh, we're winning. You know, Putin is lost. He doesn't know what to do. I don't know, what they're feeding the president in the White House, but whatever it is, the whole White House, from my standpoint, is beginning to look a lot like Weekend at Bernie's. It doesn't make any sense. It's delusional nonsense, and somebody ought to stop it. But, we're not in government, we're not in authority, and Washington is a bubble. So a friend of mine who was in the Spanish army that worked for me, very fine officer, Spanish general staff officer, said, Douglas, the United States is not a country. It's a planet. And he wasn't wrong. We live on our own planet in many ways, and that can be very good in some ways and very bad in others. And right now, Washington is clearly on another planet. It needs to come back down to earth and deal with reality.